In this video on the causes of the Civil War, we will mainly address the annexation of Texas to the United States. Last time, we spoke about how slavery in the federal territories is a unifying theme for the causes of the Civil War. We walked through our table of contents, how we'll be speaking about abolitionism, we've spoken about the possibility of territories, and we're now in this movement of westward expansion as we march through our causes of the United States Civil War. Also, to review on those possibilities of territories, remember, as this central issue for causing the war, Congress had total authority to deal with the federal territories, all the land out west from the Louisiana Purchase and the new land yet to be gained from Mexico, such as Texas and the Mexican Cession, which is the subject of our next two lectures. The possibilities, what could Congress have decided? To ban slavery and all the territories be free, to guarantee slavery and all territories be guaranteed for slavery, to draw a line to separate some from others, or to somehow avoid the issue or use popular sovereignty, meaning let the states themselves decide. On the issue of the annexation of Texas, recall that not only was Texas part of Mexico, but Mexico was a colony of Spain. And shortly after the War of 1812 concluded in 1814, you had a treaty between the United States and Spain, whereby the United States purchased Florida from Spain, which had been a colony. They purchased it from Spain in the Adams-Onis Treaty, and they also defined the boundary between Louisiana and New Spain. Seems very boring. So what? Well, this is all the while an independence movement is going on in Mexico. The Mexicans are fighting for independence, and the issue is this: Mexico wants the United States to recognize their independence as a fellow former colony, as a state that has, should be on the side of revolutionaries. Mexico wants to have a friend in the United States. By the same token, Spain is much more powerful historically and has many allies in Europe. And remember that the revolutionary side in the much longer and much more recent war, the Napoleonic Wars, remember the U.S. just lost, France just lost. The powers of restoring monarchs to power, they won that war and formed the Holy Alliance, a group of countries whose aim was to undo revolution wherever it may be found in the world. So this is a very dangerous game the U.S. is playing. This is why we're trying to be on friendly terms with this new country, Mexico, but at the same time kind of going behind their back and drawing up deals with Spain. But by 1821, Spain recognizes the independence of Mexico, and the colony formerly known as New Spain becomes known as Mexico. It was a long, drawn-out war for independence, and they initially become a monarchy. There were those who thought that it would become a republic, but one of the conservative generals, Agustin Iturbide, led troops, and he, at the end of this conflict, when no suitable monarch could be found, he becomes proclaimed the Emperor of Mexico in 1821, shortly after the war. So they do not, unlike the U.S., they do not go from a monarchy to a republic as easily. You actually replace the Spanish monarchy with a Mexican local monarchy, or an emperorship under Iturbide. But then just 2 years later, there is another coup under General Santa Anna, who proclaims a Republic of Mexico. And Santa Anna is one of the key leaders of this time period, and quite an interesting recurring character. But it is all not easy for Mexico as they become independent. Spain had this history of refusing to let go, and even though her armies were defeated, much like the British were defeated at Yorktown, that led the British to sort of see the writing on the wall and decide to treat with the United States and agree to accept it, Spain simply refused that. They had many instances of a whole army being defeated and then going back home and preparing another army and preparing another fleet and simply blockading Mexico as much as they could and continuing to threaten to land troops for years after it was obvious that Mexico would eventually win independence. Spain just would not let go. Another legacy of colonialism in Spain is that the Spanish had a more absolute form of monarchy that did not give many of the Spanish people any insight into government the way many of the English colonies had self-government. Mexico did not. You also have a very different system of both race and class compared to what we've seen in the United States. A majority of people in Mexico are people of African descent, people who are full-blooded Native American, and a very large population of mestizo, or people of mixed race, or mulatto, people of mixed race. And there is a small, say 10% full-blooded Spaniard white minority that has an awful lot of the privileges of the government, and in comparison to this 90% majority of people who have some lesser second or third class citizen status. Furthermore, and finally, you had an underpopulated part of northern Mexico where they were eager to have more economic development. Our second subtopic under the independence of Mexico is to also bring to mind President Monroe's Monroe Doctrine. This is during, I believe, a State of the Union address where his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, drew up this policy, and Monroe stated it, though he didn't call it the Monroe Doctrine at the time. They stated that any recolonization in the Americas would be viewed as hostile towards the United States. So, that means if Spain tries to recolonize Mexico, or even Britain, or if some other country tries to reestablish colonial control in Central or South America, the United States would view that as a hostile act. Now, the U.S. did not have much authority to enforce this, of course, but this would set important precedents going forward. Really, the whole question turned on what Britain would do. And the United States had considered a joint declaration with Britain that the United States and Britain would disapprove of any recolonization. However, the United States would very much be the junior partner in any such statement. So the United States jumps the gun and makes the statement on our own. To Britain, their feelings aren't hurt because this was a relatively minor issue to them, and yet a major issue for the United States. So the main reason at the time this has any weight with other countries is not that they fear antagonizing the United States, but more that they realize that Britain is on board with it. Because Britain, with the downfall of Napoleon and the downfall of France, and the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the rise of capitalism, and they're promoting free trade and shipping, and the British are growing extremely rich and powerful, and they see no need in wars and colonization in the Americas, that these will only disrupt the British success and free trade. Another reason that the Monroe Doctrine, as we stated earlier, the reason the Monroe Doctrine was promulgated, that Monroe felt the need to state this, is the fact of the Holy Alliance, the anti-revolutionary alliance of Austria, Prussia, and Russia, who in theory threatened to undo revolution wherever it would be. The United States and President Monroe and the government did not look fondly on the idea of large European armies storming into South Central America, Mexico, for that regard. So it brings us to the actual independence of Texas, our final topic for today. Texas itself engaged in a 2-year war for independence from Mexico. Texas was the northernmost province in Mexico, and the people there fought for independence and broke away and formed an independent country called the Lone Star Republic of Texas by 1836. How did that happen? Mexico had been encouraging and had a problem with American immigration, Americans immigrating to Mexico, though they desired it. They had an underpopulated part of the country, and they offered these enormous land grants to people they called empresarios, sort of big landed men who could bring many other people with them, and for every family, every so many number of families that you could bring, they would give this empresario, or the big man, many more acres of land. And so what you had, such as Stephen Austin, for example, you had these people who, thousands of Americans who immigrated to Mexico and built up large plantations. Key to any large plantation being profitable was slavery, and so many of these Americans brought slavery with them. The Mexican government treated the North with salutary neglect, much the way the British had done toward its American colonies years before. However, this changed in 1829 as Mexico, which again, Mexico, having only a 10% full-blooded Spaniard white minority, found banning slavery much easier than the United States would. And they attempted to impose this on Texas. Now, there were many other issues regarding government and taxation, but banning slavery is also a flashpoint for the Texans and an example of what the Texans, these American immigrants to Mexico and Texas, they rejected. And so based on taxes, based on corruption, based on banning slavery, for a variety of reasons, simply began refusing to honor most laws of Mexico. So the Mexican government sends the army to try to end self-government in this part of Texas. And there's a couple of famous battles, the Alamo and the Goliad, where Texans were slaughtered, but then the Texan army wins a terrific victory at the Battle of San Jacinto and captures Santa Anna, who, like Napoleon, would serve as both leader of his country and leader of the army. And with that, he agrees to let Texas go in a piece of paper he signs without getting the Congress to ratify it. And this causes, him technically to fall from power and almost another set of political instability and a coup in Mexico. And so Mexico continues to negotiate with Texas, and sort of the way Spain had done years earlier, where they refused to let go, Mexico doesn't really want to let go of Texas, but they have a ceasefire and they're in negotiation. Many in Mexico think that Texas is gone and never coming back, but many more in Mexico think of this as more of a ceasefire, and that they'll sort of get their act together and retake Texas as part of Mexico, as it had been for, say, 300 years. So they saw this independence of Texas as really temporary and a ceasefire while they had got their government stability together. About 10 years later, there begins to be a major push for annexation of the Lone Star Republic to the United States. Texas had run up a debt and had a poor economy on its own, and many had shifted from the glory of independence, the idea that being one of the United States would be a better idea. So they petitioned for annexation. It fails as a treaty, needing 2/3 of the Senate, and so they'll actually push it through as just a law, as a plan of annexation. And so President Polk wins the election of 1844, making the annexation of Texas one of his major platform promises. And so with a simple majority, rather than the 2/3 needed for a treaty, because there were those who opposed annexing Texas, and by simple majority it passes, and in 1845 Mexico is added to the United States. This is one of the central causes in provoking the war between the United States and Mexico, because this is outrageous. You'd say, well, hadn't Mexico already let Texas go? And well, yes and no. They had agreed to that ceasefire, and many in the government wanted to let Texas go permanently, but many wanted to see Texas come back to Mexico in the not too distant future. And so, for these reasons, next time we'll begin with the other causes of the Mexican War. Thanks for watching.